Hello, my friends, and today we have to start with the fact that the peace negotiations are once again reaching a dead end because Trump is calling for Ukraine to give up the entire Donetsk region. Ukraine naturally doesn't want to accept this condition, and Russia is saying that they will continue moving toward their goal and won't back down from a single demand. So political ambitions continue to dominate this process. Because of that, the war goes on, and Zelensky said that holding cities like Kupyansk or Pokrovsk under Ukrainian control gives the strongest possible position for negotiations.
On the key fronts, Kupyansk, Pokrovsk, Huliopol, it's important that Ukrainian soldiers continue destroying the occupiers, defending their positions, and carrying out combat missions. This is the foundation of our ability to negotiate in Ukraine's interests. Russians are spreading claims worldwide that Ukraine supposedly cannot defend itself, that Ukrainian soldiers are too weak to hold positions. But the daily combat performance of our army, our special services, and our deep strikes is proof that Ukraine can protect its interests.
As we can see, these are all political decisions. But for some people, this war has turned into just a business, even something to bet money on. It's now reported that wagers are being taken on which Ukrainian town will be captured by Russia next. Polymarket has opened bets related to the progress of the war in Ukraine. A live update on battle map synced with the Ukrainian monitoring services is now displayed in real time on Polymarket. Users can bet on which town will can bet on which town will be taken next. So for some, the war in Ukraine has become nothing more than a game. Friends, be sure to share your thoughts in the comments. But even though the situation on the front lines keeps getting worse, the real problems are finally being talked about, specifically the lack of personnel in the brigades. This is one of the main reasons the front sometimes collapses and why we are seeing so many towns being captured. And today, Zelensky commented on this issue.
We're also responding to requests from the brigades. After my visit to the frontline areas, one of the key requests a fair distribution of personnel between brigades and replenishing units with people absolutely needs to be reviewed. This is something almost every combat brigade brings up. The general staff has now been instructed to work through all of this.
And here is what Ukrainian soldiers themselves are saying about the situation. The 30th Mechanized Brigade is suffering from a very, very serious shortage of personnel. The situation with our fallen brother, unfortunately, is not an isolated case. Spending up to a year on the same positions is already considered normal here. We want people to understand not only the heroism of the soldiers, but the main problem they throw people onto positions and never rotate them out. By coincidence, I personally replaced my comrades who weren't even scheduled for rotation, even though they had been holding the same position for 11 months. And now my own time here is approaching 100 days. The military journalist also commented on this situation. Finally, I hope the critical issue of distributing new recruits within the ground forces can actually be fixed. We are one step away from a complete collapse of the General Staff's personnel policy. It's impossible that with the 30,000 people being mobilized every month, frontline brigades still end up severely understaffed. I want to highlight the 30th Brigade in particular. The soldiers have been holding the same positions for a year or longer. I showed one of them in my reports. Serhiy Tishenko spent 471 days in a trench. After that interview was published, people started messaging me saying the problem is systematic and it's not just the 30th Brigade, but Tishenko's story shows exactly what's happening. Assault units are clearly prioritized when it comes to manpower, that's a fact. But At the same time, they are not reinforcing units that are holding the front line. That's why the defense collapses and why the Russians push through. And that's how we ended up losing Dobropillia, Pokrovsk, and several other towns. I hope the general staff finally takes this seriously, otherwise, there will be more and more cases like Tishenko's, and public anger will only grow. So, why these problems are being addressed only after 3 years of full scale war remains a big question. Meanwhile, after Witkov's previously classified conversation with Kremlin representatives was leaked, it became clear to everyone that he was the one who ensured Trump wouldn't provide Ukraine with long range weapons, despite Trump being very close to improving this decision. And now Peskov is trying to defend Vitkov so he won't get fired, since Vitkov effectively did Russia a huge favor.
And probably the voices calling to fire Vitkov are aimed primarily at derailing the modest progress toward reaching a ceasefire through peace negotiations. This is a serious process. Putin just said he would brief Lukashenko on the current state of this negotiation track. Right now, nothing is more important. And of course, many people will try anything to disrupt it. If you read the leak, whether it's true or not, there's nothing particularly alarming there. Absolutely nothing. Even President Trump, by the way, defended Vitkov indirectly. This is normal work for someone involved in negotiations between the parties, so I wouldn't exaggerate the supposedly destructive impact of these leaks.
Overall, it's clear that Russia is doing everything it can to pursue the United States to take its side, and for now it seems to be working, which means the war will continue. Now let's move on to the front line and start with the Konstantinivka direction. The situation here is tense. The Russians are trying at any cost to build up enough force to break through to Konstantinivka. They are attempting to advance near Ivanopilya and are assaulting Pleshiivka and Klebenbyk in order to take control of this area and approach the southern outskirts of Konstantinivka with a wider front. They're already pushing there today, but only along a very small section of the front. They're also trying to get closer to the northwestern part of the city to cut off Ukrainian logistics as much as possible and are pushing through the fields toward the village of Mykolaipilya. In addition, attacks near Chasiv Yar continue, though there have been no new territorial changes there in the past 24 hours. In the Dobropilya direction, activity has increased slightly. Russian forces are trying to assault the villages of Dorozhny, Nove Shachove, Vilne, Shachove, and Sofiivka. As we can see, they are attempting to move directly toward Dobropilya and are trying to straighten the front line around Shahove. The entire area there is already essentially a gray zone. However, Ukrainian forces are still not allowing them to gain a foothold, and the fighting continues. In the Pokrovsk direction, the Russians are assaulting Rodinske, Mirnograd, Grishine, Molodetske, and are pushing through beyond Udachne. And despite the political decision that Pokrovsk must be kept under Ukrainian control, we are seeing counterattacks. But as we can see, the Russians are not standing still. Each day, more of their forces are entering the city, and destroying them completely hasn't been possible. Now let's move to the Novopavlivka direction. Here the Russians are attacking Dachne and advancing toward Ivanivka. However, over the past 24 hours, they haven't achieved any new gains, and the front line remains unchanged for now. In the direction of the settlement of Pokrovsk in the Dnipropetrovsk region, the Russians are breaking through around Vorone and assault in Sosnivka. However, there have been no new changes over the past day, although the situation is far from simple in recent days. There was already a breakthrough toward the village of Kolomytsi, and the Russians are getting closer to their main objective. In the Gulay direction, the situation is even worse. Fighting has already begun on the outskirts of the city, and the Russians are storming the area. Battles are also underway for parts of the villages of Zeleny and Vysoke. At the same time, assaults on the village continue, and there have been no changes in the past day, but the situation keeps getting worse day by day. And here is what Ukrainian soldiers are reporting. The situation in this direction is catastrophic. There is no other word for it. If resources aren't moved here, though that will have negative consequences on other fronts, it will be impossible to hold Gulay. And this is before the Russians have even started advancing from the south, though that's only a matter of time, believe me. Keep believing that it's a gray zone everywhere. Keep believing the official sources who say they have everything under control and are even launching counterattacks. But I can't lie to people that blatantly. In the Zaporizhia direction, the Russians are assaulting Primorsk and carrying out a large number of strikes on the frontline settlements. However, the frontline hasn't changed over the past 24 hours. In the Kherson direction, the Russians continue the attacks near the Antonivsky Bridge, but they haven't achieved any success and the front line remains stable. And now let's move to the Siversk direction. Here, the Russians are assaulting Yampil and Dronivka, pushing toward Siversk and attacking Sviatopokrovsk. So far, they haven't achieved any new success, and the front line hasn't changed over the past 24 hours. In the Liman direction, the Russians are trying to break through the forest toward Liman, Sultan, Zarichne, and Stavky. For now, the front line remains unchanged. In the Borova direction, the Russians are pushing toward Novoplatonivka, but they haven't achieved any success, and the front line hasn't changed over the past 24 hours. In the Kupyansk direction, the Russians are assaulting Kupyansk and Petropavlivka, but they haven't managed to advance further despite all of Putin's claims of full control of the city. This information hasn't been confirmed, and the southern part remains under Ukrainian control as before. In the Veliki Burluk direction, the Russians haven't launched any new assaults, and the front line hasn't changed over the past 24 hours. In Vovchansk, the fighting continues. The Russians are also pushing in the area of Sinelnikove toward Liman, and unfortunately, small gains have already started to appear. The Ukrainian forces report that the Russians have been spotted on the outskirts of Liman. Destruction of the Russians on the western outskirts of Liman, Vovchansk direction. This indicates that the gray zone in this area is expanding. In the Sumy direction, activity remains minimal. The Russians are pushing in the areas of Kostiantynivka and Volodymyrivka, but they haven't made any gains and the front line remains stable. Meanwhile, Kaya Kallas believes that Russia's army must be limited to prevent further attacks on Ukraine.
This is a very good question. Exactly that. In order, if we want to prevent this war to continue, then actually we should, curb the army of Russia and also their military budget. Because if you're spending 38% of your total budget on military, and by the way, only 16% on social affairs in Russia. So if you're spending 36 or was it 38? I'm actually might mix the numbers, but close to 40%, let's say so, close to 40% you spend on the military, then you will want to use it again. And that is a threat to us all. And that's why the focus should be on these concessions that Russia will make. Of course, I mean, we have always said that it's a sovereign right for every country to decide their size of the military. And that's why we shouldn't walk into that trap that Russia is setting, talking about the gapping of Ukrainian army. Because again, I'm coming to my point, historical point. I mean, Ukraine has never attacked Russia. And those 19 countries that they have attacked have also not ever attacked Russia. So yes, I agree with you. The focus should be on what kind of concessions, limitations we see from the Russian side so that it wouldn't go any further and, they wouldn't have the chance to invade again.
The issue is that Europe and the US currently cannot influence Russia or set conditions for it. So we see that Trump is doing what Russia wants and is not putting pressure on them at all. Friends, share your thoughts on this in the comments. Meanwhile, Merz still thinks that Russia might simply stop the war and withdraw its troops from Ukrainian territory. And he urges the US not to make decisions without Europe's involvement.
In a phone call last Friday, I told President Trump exactly that. But at this critical moment for Ukraine, Europe, and our alliance with America, I also want to make it clear that European matters must be resolved in agreement with Europe. Europe is not a pawn. Europe is a sovereign player pursuing its own interests and values. And in all these events, ladies and gentlemen, we must not forget that the war could end tomorrow if Russia stops its unlawful attack and withdraws its forces.
Friends, be sure to share your thoughts in the comments. And that's all from me, so please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on all the latest news. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.